Hi Cornerstone, my name is Valerie Keaser, sometimes called Val Keaser, and my genuine prayer is this is a real blessing to you today. I know it was a real blessing for me to prepare this. However, several weeks ago, Todd asked me if I wanted to be a voice of Cornerstone, and I kind of reluctantly said yes, and at the time, he told me what this was about. He said, just talk about how you're experiencing the Lord lately and where have you been pressed in to know Him more deeply and personally. And so then last week, he said on Wednesday, it's your turn. And I hesitated because I said, well, pray for me because I'm getting nothing. And what I didn't go into detail with Todd on was the fact that I was in a really bad place and I wasn't hearing from the Lord. I was like in a state of depression or despair or something. And I thought, Lord, I can't do this now. This is not a good time for me. I didn't tell Todd that. I thought, well, I'll pray on it. And that next day, while I was still praying on turning Todd down and telling him this wasn't my time, I read a blog from one of my friends, and her daughter, it was actually her daughter, this beautiful Christian lady had gone through a very painful and traumatic divorce. And it was her birthday and she was turning 26, and she wrote 26 things I would have told my 25-year-old self. One of them was, share your story. You have no idea how many people can relate to your story. And the second thing she shared was, your shattered heart can only be put together by Jesus. But the last thing she shared, which made me realize I need to share this, was when people ask you, so how are you doing? Don't keep saying, I'm good. Tell them how you're really doing. And that really spoke to me because I thought, well, I can't be dishonest with people, even with you, and pretend like everything's fine when it's not. And I knew that years ago I had studied lamenting, and I thought, I'm going to check into that lamenting thing. And so what lamenting is, basically, is crying out to God. Now, an official definition of lamenting, it says, is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. It's a mourning. Lamenting is not complaining. And the difference between like grumbling and complaining, because God tells us not to do that, and lamenting is like our attitude. Like, are we prideful or are we humble? Do we want God to help us? So when I wanted to learn more about lamenting, I Googled lamenting, and it was strange. The first thing that came up on YouTube was this guy, I thought, quoting a psalm, and I was listening, and then I heard the word coronavirus, and I thought, well, wait, that's not in the Psalms, and come to find out that what he had done, and he wasn't acting like this was in the Bible or anything, but he had wrote his own psalm for the time we're living in. It just encouraged me to write my own psalm. The way that most of the order of the Psalms of Lament go is we start out addressing God. Like, we immediately acknowledge we're talking to God, we're pouring our heart out to God. And then we describe our suffering to God. Like, we all have suffering that we're doing. And in my case, I was thinking of the world and the pandemic and just this new way of life that we're all living. And then I thought of George Floyd and just the injustice in the world. And then the other thing that was troubling me is just the division I see in the church. And that just grieves my heart, because we're supposed to be of one body, one faith, and yet I see such division in the church. It just hurts my heart. And I want you guys, as you're listening to me, relate this to your life. All the things that some days we just have really rotten days. And so I was able to just pour that all out to God. I was describing my suffering, as it says. And then a lot of times we see in Psalms where they curse, and David cursed his enemies quite often. I was reading in Psalm 109, if you want to read cursing, there's a lot of cursing that David does throughout the Psalms, but Psalms 109 really is eye-opening. And then in the Psalms, when we lament, we can protest our innocence or we can admit our guilt. And We also petition God for divine assistance. We acknowledge that we need His divine assistance. And then we have faith that God does hear our prayers. And then we do anticipate God responds. So many of the Psalms end with thanksgiving, and we want to end our lamenting with thanksgiving. And if you guys just go in and start reading Psalms, it's just beautiful and just so encouraging how the Psalm will start out, and then it always ends with thanksgiving. And a lot of times it ends in a prayer as well. And so I'm actually going to read to you Psalm 20, starting with verses 6 to 9. And this is in the Passion Bible, and I'm really liking the Passion Bible, especially when I read Psalms. It says, "My deliverance cry will be heard in His holy heaven. By His mighty hand, miracles will manifest through His saving strength. Some find their strength in weapons and wisdom, but my miracle deliverance can never be won by men. Our boast is in the Lord our God, who makes us strong and gives us victory. Our enemies will not prevail. They will only collapse and perish in defeat while we rise up full of courage. Give victory to our King, O God. The day we call on you, give us your answer." So church, my encouragement to you, my challenge to you is to just write your own lament, to start lamenting, because we're all struggling. I mean, some days we have really rough days, and I know that when we pour out our hearts to God and just lament in the way the Bible teaches us to, it is so refreshing and healing, and it gets our mind in the right place. I am so excited to start seeing you guys again, and it's just been such a blessing and a joy to talk to you today. Thanks.